Hello, everyone. We're going to move forward with the program. And now we're going to have a interactive session, and we're going to get some of your questions answered. So we have a panel here of experts and one humble moderator, Ms. Barbara Harrison, Dr. Marva Moxey-Mims, and Michael Spigler. We're going to take some questions, and each of them will respond. And then at the end, hopefully we have time enough left to have a little bit of a question and answer period. Okay, let's get this started. We're going to start out with a medical question. Here we go. For a long time, kidney disease was treated with a bit of one-size-fits-all approach. Can you explain to our audience why identifying APOL1 genetic variances changes the game, and what precision medicine actually means for kidney patients? And we're going to start out with Dr. Moxey-Mims.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd just like to say what a pleasure it is to be here. So with regard to the one-size-fits-all, I was speaking to someone earlier today, don't remember who, saying that for decades in nephrology, we always felt like the stepchildren to the cardiologists because they always seemed to have fancy new diagnostics, fancy new treatments, and we had very limited options. And I think that's why for so long it was a one-size-fits-all, because we didn't have a lot of options to offer people. Steroids was always a big go-to. So I think in terms of APOL1 and the perspective of precision medicine, and in fact a lot of genetic kidney diseases, knowing that is very helpful because it prevents patients from having to go through so many medications that we know don't work for genetic disease. And so you can save people time along that that diagnostic journey, or for some people it's a true odyssey to try and find out what they may have. So I think APOL1 changes the game, as one of the patient panelists said, I think it was Amani. It's also freeing to have a diagnosis and know what's going on and not beat up yourself about what you may or may not have been doing.
Thank you. And as we go through the questions, I'll direct it to one person, but certainly if there's additional remarks that the other panelists make, I'm going to certainly invite them to do so. Anyone want to add anything? Okay. Moving forward. We know that having 2 copies of the APOL1 risk variant significantly increases the risk of rapid kidney decline. What does the current research tell us about why some people with these variants experience aggressive disease while others remain stable? Again, we're going to start with Dr. Moxey-Mims.
Okay, so I think that was touched on a little bit earlier in Dr. Lee's video. So, as was pointed out, about 13% of African Americans carry 2 copies of the high-risk variants, but only about a quarter of them are likely to go on to chronic kidney disease and potentially end-stage kidney disease. So what the research has shown us so far, and obviously we're still learning a lot about this, is that for some people you need that quote-unquote second hit. That just because you have the high-risk variants does not mean that you're absolutely irrevocably going toward kidney failure. And I think that should be reassuring for people. One of the the key pieces to look at are what are your symptoms, what are your findings. That's likely to give you clues about what may be coming down the road. So the big piece, proteinuria that you heard folks talking about, APOL1 kidney disease, or AMKD, is a proteinuric disease. So if you get tested and you have 2 risk variants, but you don't have any proteinuria, yes, your doc can monitor you for that, but if you have kidney disease, your EGFR that you heard mentioned earlier is off, and you see that your kidney function is declining, even if you have the variants, if you don't have proteinuria, you have something else going on that's giving you your kidney failure. So I just would like to make that point that you can have 2 high-risk variants and kidney disease, and that kidney disease may not be AMKD. It could be something else if you don't have proteinuria. So we still have a lot to learn about the second hit, some viruses, high blood pressure. There are diseases where it's not been shown to be causative, but can aggravate or cause diseases to progress more rapidly. Things like lupus, like sickle cell disease that's causing kidney disease. So you can see APOL1 high-risk variants exacerbating those diseases, even though they may not be the underlying cause.
Thank
so
you.
A lot to learn.
And I'll add to that just the phenomenon that this is very complex, and we are still learning. And one of the things that many things struck me during the patient panel, which was just absolutely awesome. And I'm kind of glad we didn't have to follow right after them, but then the spoken word came, and I was like, well, I guess like the bar is so far up here. But it's that it is complex, and we are still learning. Our genes don't work in silos. They interact with other, genes and other places. The kidney is a very complex organ. So one of the challenges I think that happens when we do genetic testing, and back to what was said during the panel was, I got this result, and I talked to the genetic counselor, and I just felt like I didn't get any answers. And it may have been that person just didn't have any. We didn't know enough. We're still trying to figure it out. And I think there is this tendency, I think that all just comes as humans, that you kind of want A to cause B and then B causes C, and it's this very straight line so that you can comprehend and understand it. But genetics, unfortunately, when we get to these complex diseases like kidney disease or cardiac disease, whatever it may be, that it does become more complex. And so you see this, quarter of people with these variants going on to end-stage kidney disease. Well, what is it? There's something about that 25%, which we know partly is due to other comorbidities, other conditions that are going on, but there may be other things, and so we're still learning. And so I think that factors into it.
Thank you. Barbara, I have a question that's totally off the sheet, but you talking made me think of it. You're a genetic counselor. What is that? We talk about the testing, and they say you need to go. Can you just briefly explain that to me and everyone else here, please?
Absolutely. So genetic counselors are master's level health professionals. So for anyone who's out there looking for a career in health, we welcome you. It was about 2 years after undergrad. But we are specially trained in medical genetics, as well as in understanding the human reaction to those results, and how people process that, and how that's processed within families. So genetic counselors are specialists within the healthcare team, so often we get people referred to us. You don't necessarily have your neighborhood genetic counselor like you have your neighborhood PCP, but that PCP can certainly direct you and get you referred, or your nephrologist, or whoever it may be. But we generally operate as part of a healthcare team.
Thank you very much. Now, let's switch topics here and go to overcoming gaps in education, awareness, and genetic testing. So I'm coming to you with this one, Mike. Genetic testing is a powerful tool, but it's still not a standard part of every renal workup. What are the primary barriers keeping providers from ordering genetic tests earlier? And how can organizations like the American Kidney Fund and the APO1 Action Alliance help lower those hurdles? What can we do?
I think it starts with what Dr. Moxey-Mims said, is that we went through a long period in the kidney disease field where there weren't really any treatments or things that actions that could be taken other than preparing someone for dialysis and getting on the transplant list. But in the last 10 years especially, there are so many opportunities now, and we're starting to see doctors start to catch on in doing that. And caring more about finding out what the cause was. I mean, you saw how powerful finding out what the cause can do from the patient panelist side of things. I think there's also concern, which we have really shown is certainly lessening, but is not gone, in the cost of genetic tests. But in many cases, there are now trials for a lot of these genetic conditions, including AMKD, in which the genetic testing is paid for by the trial companies that are working through this. So that really shouldn't be a barrier anymore either. The new one that I've been hearing, I think, the most are doctors who will run a genetic test, and it's not always an easy answer that comes back on the genetic report. You can sometimes have a variant on your gene, but it's not really known, that particular variant, we're all very different, to cause potentially some kind of a problem or a disease to happen. So those will come back on a report as called a variant of unknown significance, and that really seems to confound a lot of doctors and make them hesitant to even want to report, because like, I don't know what this really means. How do I tell this to my patient? Now, we don't think that's a good enough reason, and they should be leaning on people like Barbara and genetic counselors to really fill that gap. But I think that's a big issue. As far as what we can do, we have to continue to educate providers that we are in a new era of kidney disease, that there are options for people to get treatments and get on therapies and get into trials to help move this field forward and hopefully eventually someday end this epidemic of dialysis that has engulfed the country. I think educating providers is really important. We have to go to where they are. Many of these nephrologists, especially in small practices in rural areas, I just heard from one that are seeing patients, they're quadruple booking appointments just to try to stay above water because they're overwhelmed. They don't have time to go to conferences and professional medical society conferences and learn about this. So we've got to bring that education to them. And I think the final thing is obviously events like this and educating the public and those that are at risk for AMKD to understand that and really be their own advocates to push to get genetic testing move forward, and whatever we can also do finally just to get more genetic counselors available to eliminate kind of that knowledge gap.
Thanks, Mike. Now let's follow up on that. When a patient tests positive for the APOL1 risk variants, the conversation shifts from individual care to family health. What guidance do you give patients on how to talk to their children and siblings about getting tested? Barbara, could you address that, please?
Yeah, so again, I'll highlight some things that were mentioned in the earlier panel. This idea of attaching your genetic test results to your will is just awesome. And I had never even thought of that, but I'm going to use that. But I think what that brings up is communication. So much of the wealth that's in this type of information around genetic testing is dependent on people talking. And we know that I can certainly say for many in my community, I think it reaches, though, throughout many communities. People don't talk about health. People don't talk about what's wrong. For many generations, it just was not considered appropriate to talk about your health care or what was going on with you. But that ends up harming that next generation who's left not knowing. And so with legacy being an underlying theme here, I think this is where our power is. Even if you don't know anything about your own family history, that's something that you can change in the future. And so that's the conversation that we often have, or I will often have with patients if they are hesitant to talk, to say this is your way to make a difference. You know, we heard that the stories of the surprise, how people, you know, fell upon these diagnoses, and they said, if I knew then, right, what was going on, I would have been able to do something. And so just taking that phrase and saying, well, make that different for your brother, for your sister, for your children, for your grandchildren, and talk about it. But it requires a few things. It requires for a person to understand what they're even trying to share, right? And so again, a genetic counselor can step in there, help to break things down in a way that people can understand it and then be able to share it. Being patient. We talked about the multiple touch points, and that's true on a level of groups like this trying to educate the community, but it's also true for that individual trying to educate their family members. So first it may be, you know, a conversation, then it may be, you know, a couple months later, emailing that test report, you know, just want to let you know I was going to get this to you. You know, to later asking, okay, did you talk to your doctor about that? And understanding that this type of testing, we also mentioned, you know, earlier, not everybody wants to get this information. They may not always want that genetic test. And it may just not be that genetic test on that day at that time. It just may not be the time for that person. But if it at least gets that relative to mention something to their doctor, just start checking my kidney function. Even if they don't get that ApoL1 test, but, you know, at least start checking my kidney function. That's a step. And understanding it may take several of those little steps to get to that eventual goal of perhaps getting tested and getting that information. So those are the types of strategies and things that we talk about, kind of that understanding for yourself, having that, being patient, and understanding that those multiple touch points are important.
Thank you. Very enlightening. There are so many new things coming out now, and many of you may hear the term precision medicine. And that's what it is, by being able to take a look at your genetics and determine what is appropriate for you as an individual. So, even when breakthrough treatments are approved, insurance coverage and affordability can create massive barriers. What policy or advocacy steps do kidney organizations, what steps do they need to take to what steps can they take right now to ensure patients can actually access the APOL1 specific therapies? And we'll start with you on that, Mike.
Thank you very much, Richard. I think it starts, I wish I could say that you're going to walk into a doctor's office tomorrow and they're going to be aware of every single new therapy that's out there and whether or not you should get it. But unfortunately, that's just not going to be the case. So the first thing we have to do is awareness, and empowerment events like today are very important. The American Kidney Fund is very proud that we started the inaugural AMKD Awareness Day, which happens in April every year. We've had some great success. Amani has been really kind of the star of that, I would say. She's been in People magazine and all kinds of different things, and I think we've been on at least 3 panels together telling her story. So that first piece is just the awareness piece, which is really important. And then I think it starts to get down to, we have to be the reality of this is access to medications from a financial and insurance standpoint. We're already starting to see some of the effects of cuts to some of the public kind of safety nets that are out there, including Medicaid. That's going to get even worse next year. So I think what we all can do, and unfortunately we were not successful, and not just AKF, every single major health organization in the country tried to prevent those Medicaid cuts from happening, but that is a major issue that I think is going to be a danger for folks moving forward. So getting people access from a standpoint of health insurance is really obviously an important part of this as well. And then regardless of this, what we're going to encounter, and what we're already seeing with some of the other innovations that have come to the market in the kidney disease space, is it can be tough to navigate some insurance coverage for medications. There may be what's called step therapy. So try this and fail that first, and then we'll give you this new therapy to move forward. We've got to try to eliminate those kinds of things. And we are actually working, there's another rare disease called IgA nephropathy that we're working with the IgA Nephropathy Foundation on to try to create some education for not only patients to navigate the appeal process and try to get through that as quickly as possible, but also some support for administrative staff in the doctor's office, because sometimes it's the administrative staff, it's the nurse, it's the doctors themselves that are trying to navigate that. So I think we have to make that process easier to try to get access to those medications. But it's awareness, it's education that there's available, it's trying to protect access to those, and then giving people the tools to work around and through the system when necessary.
Thank you, Mike. And again, just to emphasize, many therapies are out there. We can do a better job. But one of the big challenges is let's talk about, of course, we know APL1 mediated kidney disease disproportionately impacts the Black community, a population that has historically faced deep systematic biases in healthcare. How do we ensure that equity is baked into how we roll out precision medicine so that these advanced treatments actually reach the communities that need them the most? We're going to start with Barbara.
So I think that there's a few different levels where action can be taken. So one is on the scientific level. If we look across the studies and genetic research that has been done, that we base our clinical trials on, that we base our medications on, that we base our availability of what we're able to do genetic testing for, what that's based on. When we look at that, only about 2% of that data is coming from communities that have a significant African ancestry. And so what that means is that, the tests that are rolled out, medications that are based on genetic information or trying to use that, which is essentially precision medicine, is limited. It may only be effective in a certain segment of the population that share that genetic information. And that's actually a harm to everyone, because within the African diaspora is the greatest diversity of genetics. So if you create drugs and so forth that meet the needs of that population, you'll really touch everyone, right, as opposed to just going to a subset. So that's one. And so that comes to people in the scientific community being better about reaching out to those communities and getting you engaged in that research. And part of that then gets us to our next kind of point, which is the importance of engagement and engagement of communities and patients from the beginning when this research is undertaken, or when someone's trying to put together a clinical trial. Don't come to AAA when you've already laid out your whole plan of how we're going to do this clinical trial, and these are the steps you got to take, and now I want you all to go and recruit for me. Like, no, that's not when you need to bring me in. You need to bring me in the very beginning. And so really properly engaging those communities is important. The other thing is make sure you have proper education. There is a lot of discussion when we talk about who to do APOL1 genetic testing on. We say, people of African descent. But we can't ignore the history in this country and how people define people of African descent, which is largely by race. And race is not a biological construct, it's a social one. In one instance in time, someone may consider someone Black, and then the next day in a different community, they may consider them not Black, right? Like, that is fluid, and so that's not gonna help define who has what gene. And so even though I understand the attractiveness of using that terminology to determine who gets testing and who doesn't, because on some level you may want to try to focus and target. And to a certain extent, there is validity in that, and that you want to target, let's say, that Black community, make sure they understand and know that this is something that's out there. But when we start to let that seep into medical policy and medical guidelines, we have to tread very carefully. Not only do you risk missing people who may not look quote unquote Black, but may carry those genes, which can happen. You also can risk going down the trail of discrimination, or of basically just supporting and continuing to perpetuate that race equals genetics, and that there's some equality there, which there is not. And so, I do a lot of work in the sickle cell space. They can tell you that that's not a road we want to go down. And so we just need to be careful as we advocate to get this information out there into certain communities, which again, I completely and wholeheartedly support, that we still be careful about what that message actually is.
Thank you. Someone else want to add to that?
I mean, I think that was so well put in terms of getting things out there. One of the other spaces in which I work that links with APOL1 is I'm steering committee chair for the Apollo study, which is, I think, maybe Richard mentioned it earlier about in terms of transplant. So similarly to what you said, that race does not equal genetics or ancestry or heredity. For the longest time, the mantra was kidneys from African American donors don't last as long as kidneys from other races. Well, now what the Apollo study that I'm part of is trying to look at is it that it's from an African American donor, or maybe the kidneys that don't last as long come from people who have the high-risk variants, and the kidneys from African Americans who don't have the high-risk variants may last just as long as kidney from anybody else. And so I think it comes back to this looking at it scientifically, looking at the biology and not race and color to answer that question. And, hopefully we'll have that answer pretty soon, but I wholeheartedly agree with what Barbara has said.
That's great. And I'd just like to make one observation here. For all this information we're talking about, we have a challenge of having appropriate diversity in clinical trials. I want to emphasize that the research that's being done in this field is being done for us, not to us. We need your participation, and part of what we're trying to do here is to educate all of us so that we can encourage and support people if they're in a situation where they might be able to participate in a clinical trial. 3 of the leading companies in this country are here with us today, so we want to give them that message. We will get, and I'm certain that Mike can have it over to AKF, and we will get inclusion-exclusion criteria so we can give that information to you should you choose to want to participate and get involved in that. And that's certainly part of what we're trying to do. The other thing that's important, we always hear about standards of care. Sometimes standards of care simply need to change, and that's where that advocacy piece comes in. And I'm going to ask Dr. Moxey-Mims to explain to us or address this question. Managing this disease requires a village: nephrologists, genetic counselors, primary care doctors, and patient advocates. How can we break down the silos between these specialties to create a seamless supportive care circle for the patient? Everyone in one place at one time, kind of a multidisciplinary clinic. Dr. Mims, could you please speak to that?
So what we have where I work at Children's, we do have such multidisciplinary clinics. It's not easy, and I know that it's not something that can necessarily be done everywhere. I mean, you mentioned rural practices where people may be by themselves, where that's not feasible. The hope is that if you're referred to a tertiary care center, you can have all these pieces in one place. Like you said, the nephrologist. We have a genetic kidney disease clinic, for example, where it's the nephrologist, the genetic counselor, a psychologist, a nutritionist, because in some cases that's necessary, and then depending on the particular type of genetic kidney disease that we're talking about, we may even need a liver specialist or cardiologist as well, depending on the picture of what's going on with that patient. So I'm not trying to say that this is a snap your finger and it happens. It takes work. It took a lot for us to be able to get such a multidisciplinary clinic put together at our hospital. You have to make the case to, of course, the hospital administrator, and then the other subspecialties that you want them to give up time in their own clinic to come and join you in our clinic. But I think if you make the case that this is optimal care for the patient, which is what we're all supposed to be about, eventually you can get there.
Thank you. Again, a unique situation, but we have to push. Everybody wants to keep the costs down. We understand that. But sometimes you have to look at that cost as an investment. I always tell people, if it costs $80,000 a year for dialysis, you identify something early and stop that patient from eventually getting on dialysis 5 years. You know, you can do the math. That's a pretty good sum of money, and you multiply that by hundreds of thousands. Not to mention, I just have to say it, the anxiety and stress that can be avoided in all of us. And to think about what we heard from those patients earlier, this disease can attack you when you're very young. And even Sharon had some issues when she was a teenager, didn't know what they were. And the kids have enough issues to deal with nowadays, and for them to have to carry that burden, I'm sorry, I just have to tell these adults to step up. And I guess we're part of that group. So moving on here, Mike, we're officially launching APOL1 Actual Alliance today to be a dedicated voice for the community. From your vantage point, as providers and organizational leaders, what is the most critical missing piece that this alliance can help to fulfill to support your work?
Absolutely. Well, I think Tracy from the patient panel said it best, is that she wanted someone to meet her where she was. And I think I really see this, this really being the way to do that, the alliance being the way to do that. You know, the American Kidney Fund, we are a very big organization, and we try to serve every patient that's dealing with kidney disease. But we're also, I think, humble enough to know that we are not going to be able to have that one-on-one kind of a conversation with someone that has any particular rare kidney disease, including AMKD. And until today, officially, there was not a group that could do that. And Richard and Sharon have taken this on, and we were at a conference, Sharon and I were at a conference, I guess it was about 13 months ago, and the idea for starting a nonprofit in this area came up. 13 months later, not only is there a nonprofit, there's an event that she's holding today. So it's quite impressive, and I am quite sure that she's going to be able to build a network that's going to be able to do just that, and meeting people kind of where they are. In the meantime, you know, we're working together. We're both part of a coalition that the American Kidney Fund founded. It's called the APOL1 Coalition. It includes the Alliance and a lot of other researchers, patients, other organizations. As part of that, we're building a list of resources from every organization. We're going to list all of them on our site so you can find anyone's information about AMKD. And also today, and in your bag, you have a postcard with a QR code to link to it. We're also starting a large nationwide survey of those living with and affected by AMKD to understand what their journey looks like, what they'd be looking for trials, for therapies, their experiences. We're going to be sharing that with the Alliance and working together to really create programs and opportunities to help patients that are dealing with this, because we don't want the same experience from the patient panelists earlier to be for the next generation of just confusion and lack of action. We really want to move forward. So I think those are really how I see the coalition, the Alliance moving forward.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that response. Now, as we look at some of the other challenges we face, we certainly have several companies who we know are here with us that are doing research in this space. Well, one observation I want to share with you is that with respect to research, we spend about $400, I think, per kidney patients, as opposed to something like, well, it's quite a bit more, several thousand for cancer. And mind you now, we never want to build ourselves up by putting something else down, because obviously cancer is a very serious disease. But what we do want to say is that we need the continued emphasis on the development of these drugs and therapeutics and the support that comes from the government. So over at NIH, forgive the acronym, the National Institutes of Health, they have the National Institute for Diabetes, Digestive, and Kidney Disease. They currently have a project going on called the Kidney Precision Medicine Project. And I've had the good fortune of working on that for several years since its inception. And hopefully Glenda Roberts is out there in the virtual world listening to us. And they're doing all things kidney, providing a lot of information that is available to the private sector, seeking to have public-private collaborations. So things are much brighter in the future than they have been in the past. So thinking about that, if we look ahead 5 years, what is the major breakthrough or shift in the APOL1 landscape that you are most optimistic about? And how about if all three of you give us a few words on that? We'll start with Barbara here.
So I will say just the advent of a gene-specific therapeutic is a big step. So, we talked about the approach up to this point of, the one-size-fit-all, try one drug, see if it works, go to the next one. But the beauty of having or knowing that genetic causation is now you can be very specific about the drug that you use. One interesting thing about APOL1, and a very quick genetic lesson. So our genes basically encode proteins, like they tell us how to make a protein. So there's the APOL1 protein that's made. What we found out was that people can live if they never make APOL1. So there are people who have different variants in their APOL1 gene that causes it not to work at all, but they're healthy and fine. And so that's really kind of great news because what that means is if we are able to stop the body from making the variant APOL1 that's causing this increased risk for kidney disease, that is a potentially a very powerful treatment. I'd stay away from cure. I would say more like transformative type of therapy. And so I'm excited about that. We've, as a medical society, we've gotten, pretty far with gene therapy. To know that that's something that might be down the road, I think is very exciting. So just those gene-based therapy.
Yeah. I echo that, and it's a little bit less onerous than some other gene therapies for other diseases in terms of how you approach it. When I was speaking with Richard and Sharon the other evening, one of the things I was saying is, yes, we can lament that, wow, it took so long to get to to know about this. And we've known for decades upon decades that African Americans have a higher incidence of kidney disease, and they progress to end stage faster. And what took us so long to get here. On the other hand, though, I think looking at from the time that this gene variant was identified to now, we've got these companies doing trials. It's phenomenal. I don't think anyone can say that someone has gotten to the point within a decade of saying, this is the problem on a molecular level, and having targeted therapies in trials. I am just so excited that hopefully within the next 5 years, all 3 of these companies and maybe more will have drugs on the market that we can use, and we may find that one drug may work differently in one subset. Like we said, we don't know all the nuances from one person with high-risk variants to another. But just the fact that we might have these options that are so targeted, I'm really stoked. So.
Mike?
Well, I certainly echo all of that, and it is amazing that we could soon have 3 therapies on the market for this. I think the one breakthrough is maybe a side effect of this, which is, as Richard said, it's the mantra has been for so long that we can't get adequate representation in clinical trials from minority populations. Well, here are 3 different companies that are really only targeting minority populations and having fantastic success. So I think a lot of researchers are not going to be able to hide behind that anymore, because clearly there is interest in participating in trials, and we need to take the learnings from these 3 companies and really make sure others are following it as well.
Thank you. Now, staying ahead of the therapeutic pipeline and clinical endpoints, a major milestone in kidney research has been the International Parasol APOL1 initiative, which focuses on defining clear disease-specific endpoints like proteinuria reduction for accelerated trial approvals. From a research and regulatory standpoint, why is having an APOL1 specific model for clinical trials such as a massive victory for getting treatments to patients faster? Translation, tell us a little bit about the Parasol APOL1 initiative.
So just to give a little bit of background of how drugs get to market, right? I'm not going to give you a complete tutorial, but I think most of you know that drugs don't get to market unless the FDA approves them. And there's specific standards that FDA requires for a drug to be approved. And so for the longest time, which is one of the other things that stymied us with kidney disease, the outcome that they looked for, they would look for things like, did you end up on dialysis if you got this drug or not? Or did your creatinine double or your GFR half? Well, we know that for most kidney diseases, that takes a long time. This does not happen overnight. And so it made clinical trials for kidney disease incredibly hard. And that's why we had so few drugs being approved in any reasonable amount of time. And who wants to be in a clinical trial for 10, 15 years, right? The people are going to get tired. So one of the things that kidney researchers have been trying to convince the FDA of for an extended period of time is, are there shorter term things we can look at that can equate for down the road of not ending up on dialysis or not doubling your creatinine? And one of those things in diseases like AMKD and a lot of other kidney diseases, a lot of them, as we've been talking about, proteinuria is what you see. So the push has been, well, can we just not look at significant decrease in proteinuria as a surrogate endpoint for going on to end-stage kidney disease or some of those long-term things that we look at. And so now we seem to be there. So Parasol, I forget what the acronym stands for, but I like to think of it as, you can think of a parasol as an umbrella, like this big umbrella trial. And so what they're doing is they're going to pool data from all over the world, people who are doing trials, drug companies, individual centers that are doing clinical trials. And that's where the power is in the data, because if you can get data from all these places, it's much better than my one trial that I'm doing. And so now, as an offshoot of Parasol, there was Parasol for FSGS, and now there's Parasol looking at APOL1 in and of itself. So if you can think of people doing research in this sphere across the globe, saying, yes, I'm willing to contribute the data from my trial, and if we pool this, we can actually see what's effective. And so the hope is that once this happens, if we can show that, decreasing proteinuria is truly a marker that people can hang their hat on, I think it's going to make drug approval for this and hopefully other diseases a lot more efficient.
Thank you. Very, very insightful. I mentioned the Kidney Precision Medicine Project, and you just explained us to about the Parasol APOL1 project. CPATH, which is another organization, they have a biomarker data repository project, and we are finally getting many of these projects efforts to talk to each other. She mentioned marker. There are things when you go to the doctor, biomarker, you get blood work, it'll tell you something like your EGFR or your creatinine. Well, that gives a sign as to how your kidney is doing. And we have research and knowledge of other biomarkers that have to be approved by the FDA. So we're waiting on that. But the point that I want to share is that there's tremendous progress that's being taken place right now. And one of our challenges is to make certain that these things that we're talking about can be covered by insurance companies and become a standard of care. And to have, as one of our patients indicated today, well, do you think we should do a genetic test? No, we don't need that. And there's one person in the room that's familiar with it and didn't get listened to. So we have to do a better job with educating, and that's why I'm so happy that we have the good folks here. I also want to mention, we heard from Dr. Lee earlier, and we also have, I'm talking about our board members, another fellow board member down at Morehouse School of Medicine who's working with us. So we think that there's a lot going on, and I just kind of want to give you an overview of some of the things that we're doing to help facilitate the passage of that knowledge. And being able to work together in a collaborative fashion, I think, is the answer. I'm going to take a look at one more question here, and then we'll open it up for some of your questions and see if we can respond and provide some information to you. If a community health clinic wants to implement routine screening and saliva-based genetic testing for APOL1 in high prevalence areas, what is the biggest logistical hurdle they face, and how can national kidney organizations help them scale their effort? Mike, why don't you enlighten us about that?
Sure. Well, I don't think I'm going to give you the silver bullet here, but I at least will highlight some of the problems. For one thing, federally qualified health centers and a lot of these community clinics are really struggling from a funding standpoint right now, which is, I'm sure, not a surprise to anybody here. And as I mentioned earlier with the Medicaid cuts, I'm worried about what that's going to mean. I mean, a lot of the patients that go to those clinics are on Medicaid or have no insurance. So just the logistics of the funding is always going to be a problem. The American Kidney Fund works with another nonprofit called the MAVEN Project, which has about 700 federally qualified health centers, mostly in like rural or like far suburb areas. And they reach about 5,000 primary care doctors and advanced practitioners that work there. And we've been talking to them about this because we want to try to help in any way we can, but they're seeing a lot of patients that are only coming in for acute issues, right? I have a fever, I twisted my ankle. And even when they're doing kind of that routine care, many of them don't have lab facilities on site, so they have to ship it out to one of the companies like Quest or LabCorp or whatever, and that could be a 48-hour turnaround, and that patient unfortunately may never come back again. So I think one of the benefits of doing something where you do a screening at a clinic like that within the health system is really important to do. But the biggest problem is just getting people to screen for kidney disease to start with. Many people will only get one of the two tests for kidney disease. You can't find out what kind of kidney disease you have unless you know you have kidney disease to start with. So for anyone that's going to the doctor, if they're only giving you a blood test for kidney disease, make sure they're doing urine as well, because that's the only way you're going to find early stages of kidney disease is through the urine test. It's actually the more important of the two, to be honest. So we have to help what we can to do there, where we can't try to, I think, supplement with other programs. There's another great organization called GlomCon that has a program called the Embark Awareness Program that's going out and doing screenings in places. There's other organizations that are starting to spin up some of that work, and I think it's going to be important. But the key is to figure out if you have kidney disease to start with and then do these tests, because it really is, it's really not that, from a cost standpoint, to actually do it, it's not that much, but the logistics that go into it in a very busy, under-resourced community health clinic, I think, can be challenging.
Thank you, Mike. We're getting ready to open it up, but I want to give my colleagues a chance. Do you have something else you want to add or share before we take questions from the audience?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Mike was saying about your numbers. We hear all the time, it's all over TV and radio about know your numbers, and they're typically referring to knowing what your blood pressure is and knowing what your cholesterol level is. But I would say to add to that, know what your creatinine is and know what your urine protein excretion is in the umbrella of know your numbers.
I did want to, there was an earlier comment around newborn screening and adding this to newborn screening. So newborn screening is really reserved for conditions where when you do that testing, there's an immediate action that needs to take place, and you're very sure about that outcome. And so I'll just say that APOL1 sits outside of that just a bit, in the sense that even though the issues may occur within the pediatric time frame, it's usually not in the neonatal time frame, not in infancy, A. And B, it's that 25%, right? It's not the 100% that are going to actually end up experiencing problems. So that's likely why it's not going to quite reach the criteria that we usually ask for when we're looking for when we add something to that newborn screening panel. That being said, that's where we are today. I'll just, as an aside, newborn screening is getting to a point where people are starting to do whole genome sequencing at that newborn period to be able to say to parents, okay, know your child doesn't have G6PD that someone mentioned, or doesn't have sickle cell, but they do carry these APOL1 variants that in the future is associated with kidney disease. So we need to keep an eye on that. So we're getting there, and I have no doubt that once we get there, that this would be included in one of those things that would be shared with parents. But as far as right now today, that's likely why it's not there.
Thanks, guys. We'd like to open it up to questions from the audience.
Hi. During COVID, we all got these free home test kits. On Amazon, although I'm not promoting, has a whole stock full of kidney test strip tests. What's the validity of some of those tests that measure multiple kidney functions? For instance, I am on a 6-in-1 at-home kidney test / test and track your kidney function and health for $75. And this kidney health and function test tests 6 key markers: creatinine, EGFR, fasting glucose, your average blood sugar, your HbA1c, inflammation, and visceral fat. Why the last one? But just wondering, I said inflammation, right? You can order it online, collect your sample at home, send the sample back to our third-party nationally accredited lab in your prepaid envelope, and then you can track your progress over time. How valid are these? And do you think that our community could, as a result of more knowledge and information coming to us as patients for APOL1, how can we add in like more comprehensive, valid evidence of some of these markers that they say they manage, or that they test, because we know, like, for instance, several transplant clinics offer screenings for free. You can go to any lab if you have insurance, if you have Medicare, Medicaid, but then if you decide, like if after coming, like my sons are like, oh yeah, I'm gonna buy 2 of those, and we're gonna have everybody take this test. What do doctors and researchers do when patients come with this type of information? I know that was a lot of questions at one time, but my head is spinning with some of the things you said in an excited way, but I'm just saying.
So I would say, I don't know how valid they are without knowing the source. So I can't answer the validity part. I think the key to look at for any test, just like drugs have to be approved by FDA, lab tests are also approved by FDA. So you would want to make sure that this is truly a test that's been validated and approved and shown to be accurate. It all sounds good. Those are all very reasonable things for people to have tested, but I can't speak to the validity of what that specific company is offering.
So I'll add a bit to that. I think the other thing to consider, and I'll just take it from the genetics world, because we talked about 23andMe, quite a bit. And so I think it becomes this balance between the benefit of larger access to testing, right, whether it's in the genetic space or in the kidney space, to what is, again, the utility and the usefulness of that information. And I'll even give an example from a kidney perspective. I'm not completely familiar with what 23andMe tests for in the realm of kidney disease. The benefit with APOL1 is it is these 2 variants. It's very, kind of relatively simple. But one thing Mike, threw out there, and we see this with other genes, are these variants of unknown significance, which can happen. So within one gene, you can have thousands of variants, types of that gene. So the example I often give is with eye color. You can have blue eyes, green eyes, brown eyes, hazel eyes, right? You have all these different variants, many of which are fine, but some of which can cause a problem. And then you come across a purple eye gene. You're just like, okay, I've never seen this before. I don't know if this person with purple eyes can see or not, or how that's affecting their vision, right? You're not sure. So that's like your variant of unknown significance. Oftentimes, a lab like a 23andMe will look for the blue, brown, and hazel. If they see purple, they're not going to say anything. If they see even, I got to kind of go off my analogy, but even if they see something they're not sure of, or it's just not on their panel of things to report, they're not going to say anything. And so sometimes that testing can underestimate risk. It can make, you didn't have these 3 things we were looking for, so we're going to tell you your kidney risk is low. But really, there's a 4th thing over here that we just didn't look at because it's just not on our panel, but it's actually really important to kidney health. But as long as they, were correct in what they said about those 3 things, they can get through your FDA. They can say that they tested, what they said they were going to test for. But how that's interpreted is what changes, and that's the benefit of having that clinician involved. And so I would say use that $75 and go see your doctor. Get the test done, right? But it is a balance. I mean, I'm not downing, companies like a 23andMe or like this company who may really altruistically be trying to just, get better access. But we have to be careful. And then you get to, I'll just say in the genetic space, then 23andMe goes bankrupt, and then someone else buys the data, and then that's a whole nother conversation we won't go into here.
Where does all that data go?
Where does all the data go? Right. And why are they offering you that $99 test? Oh, black person whose data we don't have, who we're trying to get.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hey, I had a question, but I first wanted to say, Dr. Moxey-Mims, you were my first pediatrician nephrology person, and I just want to say thank you because you drew a picture for me, literally, to explain everything to me, and you answered all of my 11 questions. So I want to say thank you. But my actual question was, since you can't test infants, newborns when they're born, if a child is spilling protein, shouldn't the protocol be test them immediately? Or if an adult is spilling protein, shouldn't the protocol be to test them for APOL1 or no?
Not necessarily, and I'll qualify that. So anybody that's spilling protein, you can, in some instances, it could just be a fluke. If they had a fever, you might have protein in your urine. If you've just run a marathon, you can have protein in your urine, things like that. Kids of a certain age, as they're going through growth spurts, can spill protein, something that we call orthostatic or postural proteinuria. But you don't want to make a decision on a single test. So the thing to do, if you have proteinuria, is to recheck it at a time when you've controlled for all those things. You haven't just run a marathon, you don't have a fever. Ideally, you want to do it as a first thing in the morning test, the first morning void. That's going to be the most accurate one. So what you want to see is this something that's persistent? Now, of course, someone who's spilling protein but's also swollen and has all these other things, you don't need to go through all that. But I'm talking about when it's just an isolated situation of the urine test was done and there was protein, you want to find out, was that real or was that just the particular circumstance on that day at that time?
So in conclusion, parents should hold the pediatricians accountable to recheck and then make a decision. And we should all walk away with just knowing that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
That's what I needed. Thank you.
Because if it's what we call fixed, meaning it's there regardless of all those other circumstances, then you need to dig deeper.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one more
Right
question
here.
and wrap it up. Go ahead.
This is my granddaughter. I go to the doctors in 2 weeks. I say diabetes doctor, it's criminal, whatever. There you go. And I want to ask, I always ask how my kidneys are doing. She give me a number. I don't really know. She said, it's okay. But I really want to go into, I'm 72, I really want to go into, is my kidney okay? I know what she's going through. I'm going through a whole lot. I'm a diabetic, high blood pressure, everything from A to Z, whatever. And I want her to tell me something more than what she's telling me with this blood test and urine tests I'm having, a lot of stuff. I don't want to go into it, but I want to know how my kidney is doing. So what question should I ask her?
You want to ask for those numbers.
Those numbers,
What is my creatinine? Mm-hmm. What is my EGFR? Mm-hmm. Knowing that you said you're 72?
Yeah, I'm 72.
So your EGFR is not going to be the same as the EGFR for a 20-year-old, but there are normal ranges for that vary with age. So you want to know that, and how much protein? Is there protein in my urine or not? If there is, how much? So if those are the specifics that you want rather than they're okay, you can ask for those actual absolute numbers.
Okay. Thank you. That calms me down a whole lot. Thank you.
Okay, folks, let's thank our guests here. They've done a great job, a lot of information, and thank you. We really appreciate that.